Hi, I'm Dr. David Dobson. Welcome to Conversations. Today, my guest is Dr. Elizabeth Rose. Elizabeth is a professor in business policy and strategy at the Indian Institute of Management, Udaipur. Her research interest is in firm internationalization, particularly smaller firms in emerging markets of India and Africa. Elizabeth obtained her PhD in business administration from University of Michigan. Today, we will discuss her research and perspectives on international business. It's a pleasure to have you on my show, Elizabeth.
Well, thank you, David. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Elizabeth, your teaching and research focuses on international business. What brought you interest to this area of study?
I have a very convoluted route to get to where I got to. Um, I I actually I chose my undergraduate school because I was fascinated by ancient Russian history and really wanted to work in the United Nations. So that at least is international. I grew up in the
Okay.
United
Yeah.
States, as you can tell from the accent. And and then I ended up with an undergrad degree in civil engineering.
Mm.
I worked as an engineer for a while for Ford Motor Company. I then went back to school in structural engineering, got a master's, and
Wow.
realized I was going to do a statistical approach to structural design, and realized I was better at the statistics than the structure. So I ended up with a master's and a PhD in statistics and taught statistics. And you're still wondering, how do we get to international
I know.
business?
Yeah, you're a quantitative person.
Um, and that I either have very eclectic interests or I lack focus, depending on whether I'm saying it or my husband. Um, but my best friend and during my PhD program was studying international business, and we kept saying, "Oh, we should work on something when we both finish." The first project we did was an abject failure. We decided to try to use exotic statistical methods to forecast exchange rates. Don't
Okay.
waste your time doing that. Um, but
Complicated
then
topic.
yeah, and that was right when the euro came in, so it
Yeah.
stuffed up everything, all of our models. But it was a good thing.
Yeah. It's international topic regardless.
but but then my colleague Kiyohiko Ito, who's now a professor at University of Hawaii, poor guy,
Mm.
he and I started working together more and more, and I found this all just fascinating.
Okay.
And the thing about international business community, it's very open.
Hmm.
So, when I
Yeah.
went to my first Academy of International Business
Mm.
conference, I said, "Oh, well, I'm sort of an interloper. I'm not an IB person." And they said, "You're
Yeah.
here. Come on in. You're
Yeah.
interested in our problems." And so it just became more and more fascinating the more I learned because there's just so much that I don't know. I have not run out of research topics in decades. And so then I switched to international business, and that's been
Yeah.
my professional identity
Yeah.
for a long time now, almost
Yeah.
30 years.
Yeah. 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 Uh, so obviously, I'm assuming that you traveled doing that, your pursuit of international business and learn about it. Like, how has that experience kind of enhances your expertise in research? Like, how do you enjoy being out in international arena?
I love being other places, and I've been a lot of places. To be fair,
Yeah.
a lot of I've been a lot of places where I've only seen sort of between the airport and the hotel for the conference, which is
Yeah. Yeah.
very bad on my part. If
Yeah.
you're going to go someplace, go see the sights.
Yeah.
Take an
Yeah.
extra few days.
Yeah.
I finally learned that.
Yeah.
But I love, I'm fascinated by languages,
Mm.
and I'm fascinated by different cultures. And actually, I
Yeah.
always have been.
Yeah.
And this means that, the stuff I really enjoy doing and stuff I'm researching
Yeah.
are quite related. And
Yeah.
I feel very
Yeah.
fortunate to be in that position.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was the travel parts. In terms of research, what do you like about international business?
I think, okay, partly it's people in the IB community.
Okay.
It's a nice group of people,
Yeah.
which is not always the case
Yeah.
large groups of people, especially
Yeah.
academics, may have
Yeah.
big egos.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, the people are really nice, and I
Mm,
think that in research we're
mm,
looking for big general answers,
yeah.
and I don't think we can do that in international business, and I think that's really cool,
Yeah.
which means that we have to really understand context.
Hmm. Yeah.
And one of the things I learned over the years is, okay, for example,
Okay.
I've spent the past several years working in India.
Oh, yeah.
And what I know about India is that I know almost nothing about India, despite spending time there. And same thing about when I spent 4 years in Finland. And
Okay.
it's fascinating to get some immersion into a different environment.
Yeah.
But I think you always have to be aware that there's way more you don't know than you do
Yeah.
know. But that's
Yeah.
great for a researcher.
Yeah. 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 So people, like, I mean, generally people everywhere are nice. I mean, generally speaking, I mean, like, people are hospitable. We all are same regardless where we go. I mean, we
Yes.
love fellow human beings. We share our food. We share our culture. What I mean? So now, how do you really difference from people to the business happens in those countries and happen internationally?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing, in addition to people, institutions are important. So
Yeah.
different countries are
Yeah.
organized in
Yeah.
or regions,
Yeah.
but often in
Yeah.
countries within regions, or
Yeah.
you know, just the way you do business is
Yeah.
different in different places.
Yeah.
We all know if you go to Japan,
Yeah.
you do the
Yeah.
standard hand over the card sort of thing.
Yeah.
But it's actually much more subtle than that.
Okay.
And that has a huge impact
Mm,
on how firms can operate,
mm.
and especially
Yeah.
smaller firms. They get really
Yeah.
buffeted around a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of those distinctions are
Yeah.
not particularly obvious just from
Mm,
walking around.
mm.
The really important ones, I think,
Yeah.
are not.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's one of the things, we've got
Yeah.
over 200 countries in the world, and
Yeah.
no two are exactly the
Yeah.
same, which means
Yeah.
that doing business, if you're going from one country to another to do
Yeah.
business, there are subtleties that you need to understand and to
Okay.
deal with and to prepare for.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I think that's part of what makes international business a never-ending source of interesting
Yeah.
questions,
Yeah.
but for me, quite fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess you do want those subtle differences. If all the businesses are same, the world would be a very boring place. I mean, then
It,
what's the point of going to New Zealand? Then we can do same thing here in Canada. You know what I mean?
it,
Because even though we speak same languages and share common culture and so many things, but still there there has to be something different.
yeah, absolutely. I think it makes the world much more fascinating, much more complicated,
Yeah,
but much more
yeah, yeah,
fascinating.
yeah. Your focus on international business is on a service sector. Can you a little bit give overview of your service sector, please?
Yeah, but it's again, I find it kind of fascinating. It's quite amorphous.
Yeah,
We think of manufacturing versus
yeah,
service, and that's an
yeah,
easy way to categorize firms,
right.
but it doesn't really capture the whole story,
Yeah,
because a service firm can be anything from a consulting firm
yeah,
to McDonald's, which is a
yeah,
lot more like a manufacturing firm.
yeah,
Um, so
yeah.
I think that that lack of precision in terms of
Mm,
how we think about it as researchers
mm,
makes it quite interesting to me.
yeah, yeah,
And most of what we think we know about international business is
yeah,
based on manufacturing firms.
yeah,
Manufacturing firms from the US and Europe,
yeah,
especially England.
yeah.
Um, and so service firms, they just have to operate differently.
Mm,
People are very, 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 very important. So, for
mm,
example, in a service firm, your frontline staff are critically important,
mm,
which means that you need to treat them as critically important members of the team,
yeah,
because they're the face of your organization. If you
yeah,
think about flying on
yeah,
an airplane, who do
yeah,
you engage with? You're engaging
yeah,
with flight attendants, with
yeah,
gate agents,
yeah,
not the senior management.
yeah,
And so those
yeah,
flight attendants and gate agents need to be treated
yeah,
well by the company.
yeah. And you're right, because they reflect the organization, the company. You know, I
Absolutely.
mean, and then as a consumer or the customer, we start making opinion about that company. It could be good or bad, depending upon how we treat it. uh,
But the other thing about services is that
yeah.
the customer plays a role in the production of the service. You know,
Mm.
I fly a fair amount, and sometimes I'm really happy to get on the plane, and sometimes I'm very grumpy. Um, and
Depending upon
you know,
which seat you got, I guess.
yeah, which direction I'm heading, and um, phases of the moon, who knows? But the thing is that if I'm in a really grumpy mood,
Yeah,
it may be that even amazing service isn't going to
yeah,
make me walk off that plane going, "Wow, what a marvelous service encounter." Um,
yeah.
so
You're
the
right.
the
Yeah,
customer is a real complicating factor in services
yeah.
that it's not so much in manufacturing.
Yeah, 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 because you're right. There's maybe mood, they might have a bad day already from home, and then it can linger to the long in all along the flight. So
Yep.
so even the nice meal in the plane may not feel nice.
And if you're in
Uh,
economy class, it might not even be that nice.
I, I thought you might have so many the points, the air mile points, so this allows you to sit in the better seat.
Usually.
Especially long flight. It's always nice to get a more leg room for sure. Uh, Elizabeth, I want to talk
Infinitely.
about your research at emerging market. You also focus on emerging markets such as
Yes.
India and Africa. Can you please talk about your work on those areas, please?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's an area that we don't understand so well in
Yeah,
international business,
yeah,
and there's just so much complication. It makes it
yeah,
fascinating.
yeah,
I'm I'm a the international business literature for
yeah,
the longest time thought,
yeah,
oh, firms in emerging markets, they
yeah,
don't really know how to do much. They have no
yeah,
capabilities. And then you
yeah,
look at firms in emerging markets, it's like,
yeah,
no, actually, they really know what they're doing.
yeah, yeah,
And so
yeah,
it's one of those things that we're not,
yeah,
academia is behind the real world
yeah,
yet again.
yeah,
Um, and so I think again, the context in emerging
yeah,
markets are
yeah,
really, really interesting.
yeah,
And you find people who are doing amazing things.
yeah,
The large firms are probably not so different to large firms everywhere, but
yeah,
smaller firms,
yeah,
people are doing remarkable things to get around
yeah,
difficult, or more challenging
yeah,
institutional environments.
yeah,
We
yeah,
see this in India. I'm especially starting to see this in Africa,
yeah,
and it's just it's amazing to see what people can do when
yeah,
they're in terms of leading businesses and
yeah,
engaging with businesses,
yeah,
even when you
yeah,
think it's going to be very difficult. And the sort of the rise of the internet largely has
yeah,
made
yeah,
has made it possible for
yeah,
tiny firms
mm,
in an emerging market
mm,
to engage with the world. And
yeah,
that's an amazing opportunity.
yeah, yeah,
It's fascinating to study.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Nice to hear that. Um, Elizabeth, I want to talk about some of those factors which might affect international business. So we know that international sanctions and
Yep.
unexpected tariffs are trade barriers to international business. They disrupt the business supply chains and logistics, and consumers suffer as a result, like we pay higher prices or not receiving the product on time. We all experience like shortage of product, so you all know all the challenges. So can you share how businesses can adapt or at least prepare for such challenges when something like happen, like international sanction or unexpected tariffs?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this is going to sound very,
Yeah.
yeah, it's easy to say, but not to do. But because especially for the small firms I study, they get
Yeah.
hit really hard
Yeah. Yeah.
by these
Yeah.
sorts of events,
Yeah. Yeah.
sanctions and
Yeah.
tariffs,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
lots of countries are facing potentially higher tariffs right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've done some work with a former doctoral student about
Yeah.
sanction, how firms react to sanctions in Iran. He's from
Mm.
Iran,
Yeah.
and first of all, it's kind of amazing. Firms can find ways to. This isn't entirely legal, but to get around the sanctions. And And part of that is if they already have lots of international connections,
Mm.
then partners are able to sort of shift those connections to a country that where the sanctions aren't in place. And so that I thought was quite fascinating. Like I
Yeah.
said, not really in the
Yeah.
spirit of the
Yeah.
law, but
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
not completely illegal.
Yeah.
But I think for especially for smaller firms, I
Yeah.
think it's really important to have good relationships with
Mm.
your employees, with your suppliers,
Yeah.
because I think what we've seen over the past few
Mm.
years now is that those relationships, when you have a good relationship, that your partners will try to figure out ways to
Mm.
facilitate things for you.
Mm. Okay.
And like I said, this
Mm.
sounds somewhat glib and easier said than done,
Yeah.
because some of these things are just going to hit firms very, very hard, and I don't
Yeah.
think there's much you can do about it.
Yeah.
They're hard
Yeah.
to predict.
Yeah, especially those international sanctions, for example. I know that because of some of the free trade agreement, like, firm can go bypass one country and put their facility in another country,
Yep.
so they don't have to pay tariff. It's a, but those typically are very, very large, multi-billion
Yes.
dollar firms, so they
Yeah.
have means and resources to go around. Yeah, so you raised a very interesting point that for a smaller firm, a relationship with many partners are important.
Yeah. I think it's important for larger firms too, but especially
Okay.
for the smaller firms who, as you said, have
Okay.
fewer options.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there is a geopolitical instability. I mean, we know we are going through for our recent memory, very unstable time in our world. And there is also risk which affect international business. And we have seen so many businesses either stop doing business in those countries very
Yep.
recently without for us to go in detail, um, or they altogether shut down the business. So how can businesses prepare for this unforeseen geopolitical risk?
And this is also really hard. The fact that it's unforeseen and
Yeah.
unforeseeable,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
businesses, it's hard to prepare for all eventualities because
Yeah.
that's really expensive.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's, again, especially for small businesses, I
Yeah.
think businesses can probably provide themselves some buffer
Mm.
when they really, really understand all
Yeah.
aspects of the business. So, for
Yeah.
example, there are issues in terms of your supply chain. Do you want more suppliers to spread the risk,
Yeah.
or do you want fewer suppliers
Yeah.
to reduce the variation?
Yeah.
Um, I had always figured, more is better,
Yeah.
but I spent a
Yeah.
fair amount of time with Dr. W. Edwards Deming, who was
Mm.
kind of an amazing
Yeah.
um, guru in terms
Yeah.
of quality management, and his
Yeah.
argument was very much you want to reduce the variation, and if you only
Mm.
have one supplier, you have less variation. I hate to agree with to disagree with
Yeah.
Dr. Deming, but I
Yeah.
think given the geopolitical changes that we're
Risk.
seeing and the
Yeah.
unpredictability, you're
Yeah.
probably better off spreading your risk.
Yeah. Yeah, because if that, I mean, if in good days it makes sense, one supplier you're paying less commission and you have very steady flow of goods, you know what I mean?
Yes, and it's interesting because I think firms have been rethinking their supply chains,
Yeah.
after COVID,
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
suddenly it
Yeah.
became so much harder to get
Yeah.
stuff
Yeah. Yeah.
that
Yeah. Yeah. So that's what I wanted to ask you. Like, so there's also this natural or unusual events, like most recent we experienced being during the COVID-19 pandemic. So how can businesses factor such unpredictable event? Because I remember when COVID hit in like 2.5 years ago, nobody thought that we all going to be staying in our home for next 1 or 2 years. Nobody prepared for that one.
oh, joke. Yeah, I was in England at the time and I couldn't even
Yes.
get home for over a year.
Yeah. Yeah. That was quite
But
something. Yeah.
what struck me at
Yeah.
that point
Yeah.
was
Mm.
how quickly organizations pivoted. So I think that
Yeah.
agility was
Yeah.
really critically important.
Yeah.
We talk in strategy about
Mm.
agility a lot, but
Yeah.
you could see how critical it was. And it
Yeah.
was fascinating.
Yeah.
Academics, we
Yeah.
went from teaching in class to online
I know.
in a few days, and none of us had any clue what to do
I know.
about it.
And then we all become expert in online teaching
And
overnight.
now I kind of like it.
Yeah.
But it was that was for universities are
Yeah.
not generally known as flexible
Yeah.
organization agile
Yeah.
organizations, and that
Yeah.
happened really fast. So
Mm.
if we can do it, anybody can do it. Um,
Yeah.
it was amazing to see.
Yeah.
It's like tiny companies. There was home delivery of groceries was
Mm.
just starting in the
Yeah.
UK then, and there was a firm that went from delivering produce
Mm.
to restaurants, but then the restaurants all closed. So
Mm.
then they switched to delivering produce to people, and it was
Mm.
quite different because the
Mm.
scale was so different.
Yeah.
Uh, I didn't want 10 kgs of something just as an individual, and that's what
Yeah.
they were used to dealing with. But they did it, and you saw
Mm.
you saw grocery companies,
Yeah.
reasonably large ones in the
Yeah.
UK,
Yeah.
that suddenly shifted to being able to,
Yeah.
and their initial deliveries were not in refrigerated trucks, and
Yeah.
it was,
Yeah.
but they did it, and I thought that
Yeah.
agility was remarkable. I think it's
Yeah.
also about, one of the things companies don't do enough is
Yeah.
treat employees really well. I
Yeah.
think, if you're,
Yeah.
there was another company that I heard
Yeah.
about that,
Yeah.
they had to shut down, but
Yeah.
they didn't lay off any of their employees.
Mm.
They took that time to work and try and make sure that their production
Mm.
and their processes were much more environmentally sustainable. So
Mm.
they figured out, how to
Mm.
reduce the use of plastic. They kept their people
Yeah.
engaged and
Yeah.
employed, and I'm sure that paid off in terms of
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
employee loyalty in the
Yeah.
end. So
Yeah.
I think it's part of it is remembering that we're all in this together,
Yeah. Yeah.
which again sounds very trite, but I think
Yeah.
business is not that different to
Yeah.
just relationships with
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
and I think we tend to
Yeah.
lose track of that a
Yeah.
bit. We
Yeah.
focus a lot on the finances.
Yeah, yeah. You did a very interesting point because, as you said, the people are I mean, at least on the textbook, they say that people are the most important component of business. But we do know that in reality, the people in the businesses are not treated the most important. Like we hear them
Yeah,
lay them off. We're hearing these days the AIs are taking over the human jobs. And then we also hear some of this horror story when employees are laid off because they complain they've been burned out. So question is like why, like even though I'm sure the businesses have a good intention, why the human factors are not considered as a topmost factor, as you also mentioned that the humans in most cases are not treated well. I mean,
yeah. I mean, I think at the end of the day, especially
yeah,
large firms,
yeah,
especially in the
yeah,
U.S., for example, firms senior
yeah,
managers are largely evaluated based on their financial performance, their
yeah,
short-term financial performance.
yeah,
And this is very different to traditionally, although I
mm,
think it's changing a bit, but
yeah,
traditionally in Japan,
yeah,
senior managers had a very long-term view.
yeah,
Firms would have a 250-year plan.
you're right.
And
Mm,
that, whether you're looking at the next quarter or the
mm,
next 100 years makes a really big difference in terms of how you see, the human resources, the
mm,
people in the organization.
mm,
You know, if your decisions are based on very short-term financial results, people become expenses.
mm,
Whereas if they're based on longer term,
mm,
and you're allowed to fail a
yeah,
little bit or fail a little
yeah,
bit,
yeah,
but you're looking at the long-term performance,
yeah,
people become actual resources and
yeah,
they become valuable. So I think
yeah,
this is part of this, these different
yeah,
institutional
yeah,
environments in different
yeah,
countries.
yeah, 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 agree. Uh, your research also delved into cross-border businesses. Can you share what you have learned from this research area?
Yeah, I think what I've learned is largely how much I don't know. Um, I struggle when I'm writing papers because you're supposed to come across as the big expert, and then by the end of the paper, it's sort of like
Oh my
I'm
God.
not sure what I actually know.
Ah, yeah, yeah, you're very humble. Yeah, yeah. Well, cross-border, like I'm thinking about, like, when I think of cross-border, I'm thinking about firm based here in Canada, and next door, our US border, are then US and Mexico. I'm also thinking about, for example, New Zealand and Australia, so like, because, for example, like for us going to Seattle, it's like, okay, I'm just going Seattle. Sometimes we don't even think is that we're going to a separate country, you know what I mean? Because we cross borders so often, it's become like any other city. However, nevertheless, they are two different countries, and there is a different laws and different expectations and different tax and whatnot.
Well, and you'd run into the same thing that New Zealand and Australia,
Yeah,
as you said, because it's very very parallel.
yeah, yeah,
New Zealand and Canada have
yeah,
a lot in common
yeah,
in terms of being
yeah,
the the
yeah. Next to the
smaller,
big country. Yeah, yeah,
big, loud.
yeah,
But but yeah, so you and when you go to Seattle, it's probably very similar in
yeah,
many regards because Seattle is so close. So you
yeah,
know there are U.S. laws, but there's
yeah,
also variation within the country.
yeah.
Um, I always thought that moving to New Zealand was probably less of a culture shock for me than
Mm,
moving to certain parts of the United States,
yeah,
which would be quite very much more
mm,
different for me. I
yeah,
grew up in New York,
yeah,
and so it's understanding those nuances
mm,
that for you to go to Seattle,
yeah,
it's probably easier than
yeah,
someone from the southeast. It's Seattle's
yeah,
going to look a lot more different.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so I mean, there are the difference. There are the subtle differences.
yeah,
A
yeah,
New Zealand firm can't go to Australia and assume everything's the same,
yeah,
even though we're extreme.
yeah,
Completely open borders, basically.
yeah,
I need a passport to go there, but probably won't in a few years, and I can just
mm,
move there and work.
mm,
Um, but as a New Zealand citizen,
mm,
but it's still not the same. There's
yeah,
subtle differences, in
yeah,
addition to the legal ones,
yeah,
but there's subtle differences in how people operate, and I think
yeah,
that's critically important
yeah,
if you're going to be successful in a
yeah,
different,
yeah, yeah,
across a border, even a close border.
yeah,
Within countries, you get huge variation.
yeah,
You look at India.
yeah.
There are
Oh
so many
yeah.
different languages.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah,
we
yeah,
spoke with one large Indian firm. We did some
yeah,
interviews for
yeah,
some research, which
yeah,
is fascinating.
yeah,
And they actually said they were from the southern
yeah,
part of India,
yeah.
and they actually said, we went overseas because it was easier than cracking the market in northern India, even though it's the same country. But it's
Yeah,
so culturally different
yeah,
that they thought it was going to be they found it easier
yeah,
to go international.
yeah, 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 yeah. So I want to ask you this question. You are an American, now you call New Zealand your home,
It's
and you work in India. So what is the story behind crossing three continents?
Yeah, none of this was planned. It's I like I said, I've had a convoluted career. But at each decision node, it
Yeah,
made sense. But when you
yeah,
look back and try to create a whole narrative,
yeah,
it doesn't really work well.
yeah, yeah.
I We moved to New Zealand in 1997, so quite
Mm,
a long time ago.
yeah.
Um, and basically, I was teaching at University of Southern California. I was teaching statistics,
Mm,
and my research interests were then shifting very much towards international business and strategy. And that wasn't going to work at USC because
mm,
we had silos. We have academic
yeah,
silos
that's
at
true.
most schools.
Yeah,
And so there was a position at the University of Auckland in New Zealand
yeah,
for someone in the Department of International Business for someone who could do research
yeah.
methods. And I thought, oh, that's kind of me. And fortunately, they agreed.
Oh,
We
nice.
moved figuring we would stay a couple of years. I would
Mm,
rebrand as international business and go back to the US.
yeah.
And we didn't.
You,
I
you
did
loved it so much
rebrand.
there.
My husband especially, he loves it here. We
Yeah.
now live on an island south of the South Island of New Zealand.
Mm,
There are 440 people, I think, on this island.
wow.
No extra zeros. And it's my husband's little place on the earth. It's a lovely place to be. This
Yeah.
is actually a picture from
Oh, really? Oh,
our
beautiful. Oh,
property.
nice.
It's really
Wow,
pretty. Looks a lot
nice.
like British Columbia. and
Yeah, beautiful mountains.
and
Yeah.
so it's it's a lovely place to live.
Mm,
I I think I get restless in
mm,
terms of jobs,
mm,
and you sort of hit that 4 or 5 year mark, and I don't know what it is about me. I need a change.
mm.
So after quite a while here, about 12 years here, I decided I needed a really international
Yeah,
experience. I'm going
yeah,
to be an international business
yeah.
professor. Now, and this didn't feel so international anymore. I mean, US to New Zealand, you're speaking the same language. You know you're
Yeah,
not in the same place because things are
yeah,
different.
yeah.
But it felt pretty comfortable by then. So I took a job in Finland.
Oh,
I
nice.
was I was a professor at Aalto University for 4 years,
Yeah,
and and that was a definite international experience because
yeah,
I don't speak Finnish.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I was commuting back and forth, so I'd learn some Finnish and then forget it, then learn some. And it's a hard language, and everybody speaks good English, so my Finnish was never going to be as good as everybody else's
Yeah,
English.
yeah.
But I learned what I also learned there was a lot about qualitative research.
Mm,
My background is all quantitative.
yeah,
I learned to appreciate good qualitative research,
yeah,
which
yeah.
was very enriching.
Mm,
Um,
right.
then I went back to New Zealand, took a professorship there, and then
Mm.
decided no. And I took a professorship at the
Yeah,
University of Leeds in the
yeah,
UK, which made for
yeah.
a very long commute
Mm,
again.
yeah.
And then, but I had been going to India for about 10 years by that point.
Wow. Okay.
I got involved in the Academy of International Business. I was
Okay.
on the board and
Mm,
dealing with international chapters.
yeah,
That's why I got to India for the first
yeah,
time
yeah,
finally,
yeah.
and just kind of fell in love with the place and had a loose affiliation with Indian Institute of Management, Udaipur,
Mm,
and seemed like a good time to try and make that a more
yeah,
official
yeah. Nice.
affiliation.
Yeah,
And fortunately, they were kind enough to offer me a position that allowed me to spend part of my time there and part of my time at home. Because my
nice.
husband really would rather have his fingernails pulled out than get on a long haul flight, which is very limiting if you live where we live.
Yeah, yeah. So Elizabeth, now you've been teaching in India. Tell me your experience teaching in India. How's like teaching in India?
Oh, it's actually really interesting. It's okay. I get sort of an India light experience because I live
Yeah,
on campus,
yeah, okay.
but I find the students are
Mm,
noticeably different,
mm,
very respectful,
hmm.
much more so than in the US, New Zealand, or the UK. um, I find this, I think the thing about, my colleagues are so smart and the
Mm.
students are so smart. So it's such a big country, and IMU is a good school.
Uh-huh.
So you're taking a fairly thin slice off of a
Mm,
huge population. You're
mm.
getting people who are just scary smart, and that's
Yeah,
that's quite fascinating.
yeah,
I have always loved Indian food, love Indian clothes, so I feel quite comfortable there.
yeah, yeah. It's nice to hear your experience. Uh, Elizabeth, what is your advice to students who wish to study international business? I know in your case, you came halfway through your academic journey, but somebody, international business sounds very glamorous, so enticing. Perhaps you can give some your own advice to be succeed in
Yeah,
this
my,
area.
my own advice would be figure it out earlier than I did. So I basically had to do all the work for a second PhD
Yeah,
without it was just while I was
yeah,
teaching. It was
yeah,
it was not a smart way to do things, but I'm glad I did. I've had a much
mm,
better career in IB than I would have.
yeah,
I think be open and curious about other cultures
mm,
because there's just so much to learn. People are quite fascinating, and different cultures, the subtleties are really really interesting, and just make sure you go through open doors. It's
mm,
going through taking an opportunity, especially something that's outside your immediate comfort zone. It's confronting. It's scary.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
I've always found it to be worthwhile, and I know
mm,
I've been really lucky in this regard. but I think it's pretty. Look, I never expected to live outside of the United States. It
Mm,
never dawned on me. I
mm,
mean, I loved speaking French, so I loved being in Europe, but I always thought that was just going to be a visiting thing,
yeah,
just go for a
yeah,
holiday.
yeah.
But I think I've learned so much by
Mm,
engaging internationally that I'd really recommend it. I think, more and more in terms of business, you know, it's not so easy to do business in another country,
mhm,
but it's a lot easier than it used to be.
yeah.
And I think take advantage of that. When I actually grew up in the context of a very small family firm, so I had
Hmm.
a lot more responsibility when I was 16 in that firm than I was ever going to have when I joined Ford Motor Company, which is a little bit daunting. Um, but my my dad decided he wanted to do business in Canada.
Hmm.
And so this tiny, tiny firm that had like 5 employees
Yeah.
ended up doing foreign direct investment twice in two companies in Canada, one Anglophone, one Francophone. Um, and it was a fascinating experience. And I got to see firsthand that it's hard,
Mm,
but it can be done even for tiny firms. He also tried doing this in the UK and in Europe, and that didn't work as well.
mm,
I think Canada was easier because it was
mm.
closer.
Yeah.
Um, and we ended up finding some very, very good, dedicated employees. And that
Mm,
was really important because they knew how to do business in Canada.
yeah.
We knew about the business
Yeah.
itself, but
Yeah.
they knew the context. And that was
Nice.
really important.
Nice. Nice.
So yeah,
Oh,
just take take the risk.
yeah.
And just, studying it is just fascinating. You get
Yeah.
language, you get
Yeah.
culture, you get
Yeah.
business. It's
Yeah.
very integrative,
Yeah.
and I like that.
Yeah. 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 And I guess while you're a student, take those advantage to international travel or international semester outside of your own university as well.
Absolutely. When I was a student, doing
Yeah.
a semester abroad was
Yeah.
very, very unusual.
Yeah.
And now it's really quite
Common. Yeah.
common.
Yeah.
Ironically, it hasn't hit India to the same degree yet.
Mm,
Some schools are starting to do more of
yeah.
that, but
Yeah.
I was kind of surprised because in Europe, in many countries, it's
Yeah.
expected that you're going to
Yeah.
spend a
Travel.
semester or
Yeah.
a year abroad.
Yeah. 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 What is next for you, Elizabeth?
Well, I go back to India in a few weeks. Do have my heavy teaching, so that'll be good. Um, I let's see. I'm very involved. I've been very involved in the Academy of International Business,
Mm,
which is the largest academic organization for people who are interested in international business.
yeah.
And we have 13 chapters, regional chapters. We had a chapter in Africa that had
Mm,
been developing really nicely
mm,
before COVID and
yeah.
then sort of fell apart. And
Okay.
so I'm working on trying to rebuild that chapter because
Nice.
it's a chapter that was I helped to found
Mm,
because I was on the board at that point, and it's just very close to my heart. And frankly, the African conferences were so much fun.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I'm working on that. I'm very involved in editing a few journals.
Okay.
So that keeps me off the street. I have so much more research that I want to be doing that I
Yeah.
don't manage to find the time for. So I
Yeah.
think it'll probably be more of the same.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm fascinated by the African context, and I really
Yeah.
want to learn more
Yeah.
about that and to do
Yeah.
some good work
Yeah.
in that field
Yeah.
and to help mentor young academics because what's happening over time is
Mm,
that there's more and more research pressure, and that's
mm,
just starting in Africa.
mm,
And so you've got, again, very,
yeah.
very smart people who
Yeah.
just don't, need a
Yeah.
little bit of help in terms of getting papers
Yeah.
out to journals and in forms that are going to be useful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
enjoy doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for your time, Elizabeth, and best wishes all the important work you're doing.
Oh, thank you, David. This has been so much fun. I've enjoyed this.